So, Lucy Stone organized the other Oberlin students to petition and to protest and got the policy changed. Oberlin introduced equal work for equal pay. In the process of the student activism, Lucy Stone discovers that she is an extraordinary public speaker. She writes home in excitement to her mother, announcing that this is what she wants to do with her life. She wants to be an orator. She wants to go around giving speeches for second-grade awakening causes, speeches against slavery, speeches for women's rights, and rally people to the cause. Her mom writes back, "Honey, don't do that. That is not an appropriate career for a woman. You should just find a nice teaching job and then marry a nice man, settle down, have kids, and not challenge society by being an orator." See, back then, women weren't supposed to speak in public. So she was trying, so her chosen profession was one that was not normally open to women. Here's what Lucy wrote back to her mom. "If I would be true to myself, true to my Heavenly Father, I must promote the highest good of the world." Very second-grade awakening. "If, while I hear the shriek of the slave mother robbed of her little ones, I do not open my mouth for the voiceless, am I not guilty? You would not object or think it wrong for a man to plead the cause of the suffering and the outcast, and surely the moral character of the act is not changed because it is done by a woman. I expect to plead not for the slave only, but for suffering humanity everywhere. Especially do I mean to labor for the elevation of my sex." Indeed, Lucy will mostly be giving speeches for women's rights. She also does some anti-slavery work. Those are her two main issues, but her priority is women's rights. She does eventually get married, but when she gets married, she keeps her last name. Now, her husband was cool. He was okay with that. But society was not cool with that. This was scandalous. Even a lot of women's rights activists thought that Stone was going too far by keeping her own last name. Now, a few other activists followed suit. Women in the 1800s after this who kept their last name were called Lucy Stoners or just Stoners. Now, stoner has a different connotation today, but that's what it meant back then. So there's Lucy Stone, the original stoner. She was a fantastic public speaker. Witnesses wrote, "From a little meek-looking Quakerish body, with the sweetest, modest manners, her voice rang out like a silver bell. No more perfect instrument had ever been bestowed upon a speaker. As unshrinking and self-possessed as a loaded cannon, she moved crowds to tears and action." So here's a little taste of a Lucy Stone speech, her most famous speech, the Disappointed Woman speech. "From the first years to which my memory stretches, I have been a disappointed woman. I was disappointed when I came to seek a profession worthy an immortal being. Every employment was closed to me, except those of the teacher, the seamstress, and the housekeeper." So, she's complaining, as Elizabeth Cady Stanton had in the Declaration of Sentiments as well, that there are very few jobs available for women. She wants a profession worthy an immortal being, right? This is very second-grade awakening, right? In Christian doctrine, all souls are equal. And so a common second-grade awakening argument for the equality of women is, if all souls are equal, then how do souls become unequal when some of them are put in men's bodies and others are put in women's bodies? If all souls are equal, then all people should be equal. And also in Christian doctrine, the soul is immortal. So that's what she means with that immortal being phrase. In education, in marriage, in religion, in everything, disappointment is the lot of woman. It shall be the business of my life to deepen this disappointment in every woman's heart until she bows down to it no longer. Stone wants to make sure that all women feel that disappointment, that they understand that they were made for better things, but that they have been denied access to those better things. And she wants to help every woman notice the ways that they have been deprived of equality, so they stop going along with it, so they stand up to it. Lucy Stone and other other women's rights activists have a big push around dress reform. They want to change the way women dress. And this was a literally pressing issue because Victorian fashion, that is, women's fashion from the 1850s until the early 1900s, was, well, women dressed like that. You've probably seen in movies or TV shows women dressed like that before. And, it's kind of a good look, I suppose, but what's going on here? Well, first of all, this whole getup weighs 20 or 30 pounds. The poofiness of the skirt is based on this understructure, this hoop skirt. It's a sort of steel cage that gives the skirt shape, and then over that the women wore petticoats, and then over that they wore the dress. So, as I said, this is heavy. Most of the weight is right here on the hips. Now, up here you've got corsets which cinch in the waist, and trying to exaggerate the hourglass figure. Those corsets are not just cloth. They had steel or whalebone sort of ribs in them and then they tighten with cords in the back, and you actually couldn't easily do it yourself. The tight lacing fashion, really cranking down the corset, you needed another person to help you with that, and they really tightened them. So okay, it was uncomfortable, whatever. Also, the shoes had a heel, so you're carrying 20 or 30 pounds in this getup, and you're on heels, and you've got this tight corset in. The corset, by the way, is so tight that it diminishes lung capacity. So one consequence is that if women exerted themselves just a little bit, I mean, they're already exerting themselves by going around in these heavy dresses, in these hoop skirts, and being unable to sit down as long as they're in the hoop skirt. But if on top of that there's any exertion or they get upset, they're apt to faint because in the corset you couldn't take a full breath. Also, wearing corsets sort of shifted your innards around. This is a diagram showing where everything is supposed to be versus where everything ends up when you're wearing a corset. And wearing corsets made childbirth, already dangerous before the 20th century, made childbirth even more dangerous. Because, well, women don't always know immediately when they're pregnant. Often it takes, a few weeks, a couple months, before women realize they're pregnant. Now, when women back then knew they were pregnant, they would stop wearing their corset because they knew that wasn't good for the pregnancy. But by then, sometimes the damage was done. And so this could increase the chances of miscarriage, of babies being stillborn, of fetal defect, and of women getting hurt or dying when they gave birth. So women's rights activists recognized Victorian fashion as a menace to women's health. And this was their solution. The key figure here is Amelia Bloomer. She popularizes this getup. This is Bloomer herself. This is a model wearing the fashion. The bloomers in question are these sort of poofy pants gathered at the ankle. It was important to them to have skirts, below the ankle, and so because according to the mores of the day, legs were sexual, and so you had to keep them covered. So bloomers do the job, right? You've got these poofy pants that gather at the ankles. They get to wear sensible shoes with flat heels. And then over the bloomers, because it would be, they thought, sexual if women were wearing pants on the outside, so you have this sort of overskirt going on. And then, they're not wearing a corset. So this is safe. They hoped also aesthetically pleasing, but like most people, didn't dig that look. They preferred, most women don't cop to dress reform. You could spot a women's rights activist 100 yards away back then, because they'd be the women dressed like this, and not the women who are fashionably dressed. Women's rights activists also tended to wear less makeup. So yeah, in fact, women who wore bloomers were mocked as unfashionable and as trying to be men, because they were wearing pants, and it was not easy to be a women's rights activist in the 1800s. Now, here is another women's rights activist. She was also an anti-slavery activist. Her name was Sojourner Truth. Truth began life as a slave and became an anti-slavery activist. She escaped from slavery. She was very religious. She thought it would be a sin to run away from her owner, but she decided that if she walked away from her owner, God would be okay with that. So she took her baby girl, her infant daughter, and just walked out of her master's house one day, and didn't go back. So she later becomes an anti-slavery activist. She's a dynamic speaker. And one time she was at an anti-slavery, an abolitionist meeting, and it often happened at abolitionist meetings that some rowdy, racist white folks would show up. Frederick Douglass, who we met yesterday, was beaten several times by racist mobs. And anyhow, so Sojourner Truth is at an anti-slavery meeting. I think it was in Ohio, and a bunch of violent white racists show up to heckle and rough up the abolitionists. Sojourner Truth is one of the few black people at that particular meeting, so she hides in her tent. Most of the abolitionists were trying to avoid getting beaten. But Sojourner Truth only hid in her tent for a few minutes. While she was hiding, she thought, this is ridiculous. I'm not afraid of those guys. The Lord is on my side. So she walked out of the tent and walked to the top of a small hill and started singing an abolitionist hymn. Now, she had a beautiful singing voice. So these thugs stop what they're doing, right? I mean, they were, verbally and physically assaulting people, but they hear her voice sort of pierce the madness, and they gather around and they listen to her sing. And she finishes her hymn, and they ask her to sing another. So she sings another. And then she starts preaching. She starts preaching against the evils of slavery. And these guys start heckling her. But one by one, they stop heckling and they start listening, and eventually they went away peacefully. Now, I don't believe for a second that those guys end up, joining the abolitionist cause or anything, but the fact that she, got them to go away is testament to, how, the power she had as a singer and an orator.